The message arrived in the hour between routine and panic, when the coffee was still hot and the screens still friendly. It spilled across every antenna and dish from the Atacama Plateau to the quiet listening boys resting in the black beneath Neptune's wind. Its diction was polished, its meaning was crude. By authority of the Concord of Crowns, 12 species strong, Earth would submit within 6 days. Resistance meant liquidation. The transmission packaged star maps like a threat and philosophy like an afterthought. In Washington, in Abuja, in Delhi and Canberra and Sao Paulo, the rooms with no windows swallowed people who rarely agreed on lunch. They agreed on this. A historian was invited to the table not because anyone wanted to talk about the Peloponnesian War, but because wisdom sometimes arrives disguised as memory. Dr. Aisha Bennett, gray at the temples, carried a battered copy of a book she never opened. "They expect us to think like subjects," she said, "and they expect us to think like them. We should do neither." The first military briefing reported the obvious: 50,000 vessels distributed across a sphere large enough to make the night shine at Neptune's distance. A lattice of carriers and dreadnoughts sat behind a picket of fast attack craft. Energy shields layered like lacquer, weapons packages that read like bad poetry, plasma lances, particle scythes, gravity scissors, each one named by someone who had never watched a bridge crew boil. Their admiral, Saren Kaul of the Orate Prime, spoke on an open channel in a voice that sounded like polished stone dragged over ice. "Surrender, be useful, or be correct and dead." The second briefing was less obvious. For years, quietly, sometimes shamefully, humanity had been preparing for the day history arrived with a receipt. Not with reverse-engineered alien marvels, because none had come, but with a stubborn romance for first principles. If the universe ran on conservation, symmetry, and cause, then weapons could be built from those same stubborn things. The projects huddled under a single name: Stone Garden. In empty deserts, in salt mines, in clean rooms sunk below granite, engineers had taught electricity to throw punches. Metallurgists sculpted tungsten until it gleamed like intent. Fusion machines, tiny as drum kits and temperamental as cats, learned to spit X-rays in razor sheets. Software people, tinkerers, and poets by turns trained swarms of tiny minds to share what they learned faster than soldiers can shout. Stone Garden had a face. It was not beautiful. The Terran ship TDS August looked like a length of machined pipe someone had mislaid on a shipyard floor. 800 meters from bow to stern. No visible weapon ports, no shimmering shield. Just dull gray armor stacked in layers like pages in an old Bible. Its captain, Jonah Hale, wore his hair too short and his uniform without a ribbon rack. He had the calm of a man who waters his neighbor's plants when they are away, and the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. On his left was Commander Sato, Operations. On his right, Lieutenant Commander D'Angelo, Weapons. At the back, lotuses of holographic light that did not appear until they were needed. "Why one ship?" the Secretary General asked. "Because it's enough to start a conversation," Hale said. He didn't say what everyone else knew. It was also all they could risk without showing their hand too early. If first contact turned into last rites, it would not be for lack of courtesy. Day 1, the Concorde flooded the system with more messages. Day 2, the talking heads ran out of words that could make dread profitable. Day 3, the subways were gentler than usual. On day 4, the National Guard helped move children to shelters that smelled like new paint and old fear. Dr. Bennett spoke briefly on a closed feed. "Deterrence," she said, "is the art of convincing the other party that physics will not take their calls." She paused. "So we will speak softly, and we will invite Isaac Newton to sit beside us." The August left lunar shadow on day 5, not in a blaze of propellant, but in a mutter of fusion, a soft song in hard vacuum. It threaded the cislunar lanes without drama. It saluted the flag that was not there to see it. It slipped past the orbit of Mars, while the Concorde's picket ships adjusted their formation in a way mathematicians would later describe as overconfident. In cities and farm towns, people watched the telemetry trickle by. Ranges, velocities, the slow tick of a countdown no one had set but everyone could hear. Some prayed. Some understood that prayer and planning were not enemies. Welders who had bolted plates on unnamed machines talked in diners with scientists who hadn't slept. High school teachers reminded kids that you can map fear to a coordinate system and then do something about it. The old American phrases were dusted off not for nostalgia but for service. Speak softly. Carry a big stick. Mind your business. Protect your home. It was a strange thing to watch a single cylinder move out to meet a wall of crowns. It looked like a pencil pacing an avalanche, unfussy and miraculous. On the bridge, Captain Hale rested his hand on the edge of a console and thought of his father teaching him to drive. Look far down the road, your hands will follow your eyes. He thought of Bennett's wry smile. He thought of a line from an old court opinion he had memorized by accident. The law, like the universe, prefers straight lines. At 31 astronomical units, the Concorde sent their final warning. At 32, August acknowledged receipt. At 33, Hale nodded to D'Angelo. Bring the garden online. Under armor, in cavities no scan had found, the ship woke like a foundry. Coils shaped for patience breathed in current and breathed out hunger. Capacitors swelled with the quiet joy of purpose. Guidance minds checked, rat-checked, whispered to one another the way swallows trace a map in air. The bridge did not change much. A few new numbers blinked to life. The crew's shoulders were still. Signal the fleet, Hale said, and then caught himself. There was no fleet to signal, not yet. He smiled, the one that never reached his eyes. On second thought, signal the universe. The message that went out was simple, not because they lacked eloquence, but because they had done their homework. This is the TDS August, representative of the United Terran Coalition. We will not surrender. We will not trespass. We will not be moved from our home. We invite you to reconsider. Admiral Saren Call's reply was as elegant as a blade. We admire bravery, he said. We do not negotiate with geology. On every screen, the countdown kept falling. On the bridge of an ugly ship, Dr. Bennett hummed a tune from church and closed her eyes as if to listen better. Captain Hale looked down the road, and his hands followed his eyes. The August reached the picket line farther than any human ship had ever gone on purpose. It did not slow. It did not pivot to show respect. It slid between two scout cruisers whose names translated approximately to subtle knife and patient hunger. The cruisers flared their shields in reflex, space shimmering like heat over a highway. The August sensors wrote lines of numbers as calm as an accountant's ledger. Open a channel, Hale said. Admiral Call appeared like a cathedral of golds and blacks, a face both beautiful and indifferent. Your single vessel is an insult, he said. Your species mistakes a last stand for a first impression. We brought only enough to hold a conversation, Hale replied. Call's humor was tasteful and short. Detach a squadron, disable their drive, no unnecessary deaths. His voice to his own bridge was the same voice one uses with a dog that understands hand signals. 12 attack craft peeled off from the inner ring, gleaming with energies whose names would never appear in a physics textbook on Earth. They accelerated in curves that assumed supremacy, the way a hawk doesn't plan for the rabbit to punch back. Range? Hale asked. 800,000 clicks closing, D'Angelo said. Her mouth was a flat line. She looked like a violinist who had decided she could not make the orchestra tune itself. Garden first seeds, Hale said. Under that obedient armor, a spinal coil gun exhaled. There was no beam, no blossom of light, no theater. A 4-kilogram dart of tungsten, polished until it could seduce a laser, left the barrel at 12% of light speed. It did not care about shield harmonics because it was not a question shields were built to answer. It met the lead attacker where math insisted they would meet and made a simple correction to the universe. There was now heat and debris where a ship had been. On the Concorde flagship, an aide spoke and then forgot the word for breath. No energy signature, he said. No measurable emission. The target evaporated. Random failure, someone else soothed. In the same way that a first note can teach you the key of a song, the second dart built a scale, the third made a chord. In the span between two heartbeats, 6 attackers became a geometry of expanding, cooling regret. The survivors flinched and began to weave. The darts did not flinch because they had no fear to manage and because 1,000 hours of human labor had built them to glide around every mistake an enemy could afford to make once. "They're not seeing it," Sato murmured. "They're listening for thunder in a vacuum." Carl's voice came back. It was still cold, now it was surprised. "Explain." Hale obliged. "We built weapons out of patience and density. You built your doctrine out of light, sir. Your shields are umbrellas in a hailstorm. Pride did not die in him, it bent. Disable them," he said to his gunners. "Everything short of annihilation." A garden of fire opened in front of August. Plasma lances and particle ribbons and a few clever things that pulsed gravity like a heartbeat. The ship's forward field generators rotated fields nobody in the Concorde had bothered to catalog, because you don't publish your homework when the test is tomorrow. Electromagnetic sheathing ate charged particles and belched them as aurora that never touched flesh. Whipple foam armor drank fragments. The rest of the kill package bent harmlessly around a hull that had been told privately that it was a planet. "Drive integrity?" Hale asked. "Nominal," Sato said, with the professional boredom of a man reporting the weather in San Diego. "Show them the other half," Hale said softly. In cavities along the spine, fusion-driven Z-pinch assemblies clicked into a choreography of microseconds. A pulse of X-rays scythed from the August toward the cruiser Patient Hunger, carving through its layered armor as if the metal were an impulse to be corrected. The beam did not burn so much as remind molecules that there were easier ways to be molecules. The ship broke in the middle the way a thought breaks when someone says your name and you pretend you weren't listening. "Captain," D'Angelo said, as if she were interrupting her own music. "Recommend we geofence all kinetic shots to outbound vectors. I've plotted dispersion cones that guarantee nothing born here comes home to hit us in 5 hours or 5 months." The room processed the suggestion with the slight jolt sincere morality always gives a marching army. Hale nodded. "Write it into the ROE. We fight like we live here." Dr. Bennett cracked one eye. "Ethics is good engineering," she said, not to anyone in particular. The August danced. That was the word later. The papers and memoirs took it up because it felt human to name grace when you found it in steel. The coil gun hummed in the register of factory floors and midnight labs. The X-ray sheet stitched and unstitched. A cloud of micro-missiles, small as swallows, mean as razors, left the stern in a burst and then went quiet, listening for patterns in the enemy's defense grids. When the Concorde's point defense learned to swat, the swarm split, circled, and came back from angles the grids had forgotten to fear. One weapon whispered what it learned to the rest. The rest adjusted in the time it takes a heartbeat to reconsider. Admiral Cowell watched 3 more cruisers fail to remain themselves and grasped at dignity like a railing in a storm. "You built this in 6 days?" he asked, sarcasm as the only currency left. "No," Hale said. "We built the habit of building. The machines just arrived on time." On Earth, the reaction was not applause. It was a thinning of the throat, a settling of the shoulders. Church bells rang where they still hung. An old man in Tulsa took off his hat in his living room. In Lagos, a girl not yet 10 repeated a line she would remember until she died. Newton doesn't negotiate. Somewhere, a college kid texted "I love you" to a number that did not answer and understood that bravery and fear live in the same apartment. The Concorde's formation thickened. Pride has a physics all its own. Cowell was a student of both flavors. "Bring the second ring forward," he ordered. "I will not be taught doctrine by a species that still names ships after months." "Then don't learn," Hale said when the channel reopened. "Just watch." The August did not sprint. It strolled into the geometry of 50,000 and made room for itself. The Concorde's barrage reached a crescendo that taught their youngest crews how loud silence can be. On scopes across the system, energy climbed toward numbers that bent instruments. For a bright and terrible moment, space looked like a stained glass window slammed by an invisible door. When the light fell away, the ugly gray cylinder still occupied its allotment of reality without apology. "What is that defense?" Carl asked, a new grain in his voice. "Practice," Bennett said on a channel he was not meant to hear, and every historian on Earth smiled into their sleeves. The August's forward field coiled magnetic lines into arcs that bled momentum from charged particles, turning spears into rain, rain into mist. Beneath, a lattice of nested foams and ceramics translated what remained into problems for later layers. There was no miracle, only 1,000 solved problems stacked like brick. Hale refused the seduction of victory. "Keep deceleration windows plotted," he told Sato. "We do not rob a bank to pay the mortgage. Nobody fires anything we can't account for in 10 years. That was for the crew, this was for the world." He opened a channel and spoke like a neighbor across a fence. "We will not pursue you inside your own house," he told Carl. "We will not remove your keys. We will not burn your porch to teach you about fire. But you came to our front door with a battering ram. You cannot keep the lessons you brought." The Concorde tried adaptation then, genuine and desperate. Their point defense learned to look for nothing, a movement in the math rather than the light, and scored a few tiny victories that registered as pride in a different register. Their best frigates started to weave randomized shield phases as if to convince matter to behave like anecdotes. The swarm, the school, the software people called it adjusted. Half of the tiny minds fainted, died to teach the others. The rest angled for joints and vents and unsentimental math. More ships went out like candles in a wind you cannot see. Carl inhaled something that might have been humility. "You are effective," he said. "You are unlawful." "Lawful to whom?" Bennett asked, finally opening her book to no page at all. "The first law is survival, the second is restraint. We are obeying both." The August fired again, not a dart this time, but a cloud. Smart sand, 1,000,000 flechettes no larger than rice thrown into a vector that clipped a destroyer's forward quarter. Shields handled each fleck perfectly and failed collectively, the way 99 correct answers grieve over the one that mattered. The destroyer kept its spine. Everything else inside was heat and loose promise. On their public channel, Hale chose a story instead of a boast. "My grandmother kept a toolbox in the laundry room," he said. "She was small. The world was large. When it broke, she fixed the piece she could hold." "Threats in folk tales," Carl muttered. "Boundaries in education," Bennett corrected gently. The Concorde called reserves forward from behind the carriers, bigger ships, bristling with systems that had terrorized weaker planets into gratitude. They came the way storms come, with memory. The August stepped aside. It is a strange verb for steel, but the ship had earned strangeness. Its drive flicked vectors like a fisherman's wrist, and lances of physics wrote new punctuation into old sentences. "Captain," Sato said, eyes cold and bright. "We have late movement beyond the third ring, heavy tonnage. I assess command platforms." "Take their throats," Hale said, and D'Angelo gave the coil gun a mercy it had not asked for. Amid the work, the small work continued. Geofencing, collision cones, slop accounting. An accountant of a different faith, Sato marked every outbound kinetic with a death certificate that included an epilogue. "This will not fall where children play." That insistence, prosaic, American, unfancy, felt like its own weapon. Watching from the shelters with their new paint and old fear, people understood something pure. You can be the most dangerous thing in the room and still behave. Carl tried negotiation without saying the word. "If I order retreat," he said on the same public channel he had used for commandments, "will you permit withdrawal?" "Not with your recorders," Hale replied. "Turn off what would make you braver next time. Leave the crews, leave the doctrines, go home with this. We are not livestock." A field commander cannot lose the poetry along with the battle. Carl found enough for one more speech. "Civilizations grow when they accept law. You are barbarians with equations." "Civilizations rot when they outsource courage," Bennett said. We keep ours in-house. Sato's console chimed the way a smoke alarm does when the battery is dying, not warning but courtesy. "Captain," he said, "they're calling something in. Mass signature is strange, distant. It reads as comm relay spines, but heavy." "Answer with silence," Hale said. On Earth, engineers in windowless rooms twisted knobs that did not physically exist. In the dark above Triton, small satellites that had pretended to be rocks became quiet lions with patient teeth. The Concorde's long-range recorders went blind. Truth did not leave the system with them. "Admiral," Hale added, soft as a doctor, "we do not intend to humiliate you. We intend to make you honest." The August eased forward again. If a lone ship could look inevitable, it did. The Concorde had expected to dominate the conversation with mass. They had not expected the other party to have done homework on silence. When the comm spines went dark, when the recorders failed, when even the ships built to be eyes and ears reported only noise, Admiral Cowell believed for the first time in limits. He ordered the second retreat of his long career and meant it. The outer ring began to open like a door. The August did not fill the door frame. It held position just long enough for 1,000 species, watching on illegal feeds and whispered links throughout the galaxy, to understand a sentence translated into every grammar: go home or be made to. Then space rippled in the places humans had learned to stash secrets. In the blue haze of Saturn's rings, in the black between Mars and Jupiter, where a miner would swear nothing larger than a hope could hide. In the magnetic tail of Mercury, where particles go to be alone, hulls woke. The ring shadows shed ice. Dust avalanches fell from armor that had worn the solar system as camouflage. 29 more ships announced themselves without saying a word, because power is a language that never needed adjectives. They were not identical to August. Redundancy offends engineers as much as poets. Some were shorter, built for knife work. Some were long and ribbed with external coil stacks. One, ungainly and precious, carried nothing but rescue bays and field hospitals shiny with disuse. The names on their hulls were American in the way a second hand on a clock is universal. Lexington, Douglas, Chavez, Ida B. Wells, Little Wing, Sagamore, Mercy. It is a kind of prayer to name ships after people who argued with history until it moved. Hale did not grandstand. He opened a channel at low power and let his voice ride on the same line the Concorde had used to read their terms. "We did not build a fleet to chase empires," he said. "We built it like a levee. You have brought a flood to our neighborhood. See this wall and measure your ambition." Cowell stared at the map and saw not only ships, but a style. The ring fleet had not sprung from the ocean like a conjurer's trick. It had been layered there by people who understood rhythm, latex over paint, habit over rhetoric, calculus over posture. He recognized with a mingled admiration and disgust an ethic he had once dismissed as provincial: do the work, hide the work, let the results speak when called. He tried honesty the way a man tries a new coat. "You can annihilate us," he said. "You can end my career by ending me. You can salt your garden with our bones and call it history. If you let us go, I will testify that your law is survival and restraint. If you refuse, I will testify to nothing." "We refuse conquest," Hale said. "We refuse theatrics. We accept responsibility. That means you cannot leave with a copy of our vulnerabilities or a myth about ours." Bennett touched the console and spoke not to Cowell but to the galaxy, to children and chiefs and navigators who would later pretend they hadn't watched. "We know the story you tell slaves. That order comes at the end of a barrel. Our story is different. Order comes from consent. We will trade. We will learn. We will not kneel." The Concorde tried one more doctrine. Their carriers cut power to their bays and jettisoned escape pods in numbers that made the screen look like pollen. It was an ugly calculation. Fill the battle space with lives so that even an enemy with a conscience hesitates. Some pods were decoys packed with knives. Most bore genuine fear. "Mercy," Hale said, and the ungainly ship with Mercy stenciled on her flanks lit her engines for the first time. She fell into the cloud like a nurse into a triage tent, caught, tagged, sorted. D'Angelo split her team in two. half to salvage war, half to harvest life. Sato's screens bloomed with route solutions that curved around pods as reverently as you drive around a roadside memorial. Carl watched and recognized a danger he had not accounted for. People who could kill you without looking angry are frightening. People who can kill you while rescuing your wounded are history's hinge. "Admiral," Hale said softly, "this is the last corridor you will receive." A wedge opened in the ring formation, not to invite retreat, but to guide it. A channel broomed clean of kinetics and teeth. "Leave your recorders and your bravado and your explanations. Bring home nothing sharper than your hands." On Earth, the shelters exhaled. In the streets, people looked at one another with a careful generosity that sometimes follows storms. Not victory, storms don't offer those, but a shelf rebuilt higher, a roof nailed straighter. In a school gym in Fresno, a civics teacher stood in front of a whiteboard with a dry erase marker and put 3 words up as if they were vocabulary for a test the world kept failing. Survival, restraint, responsibility. A 10-year-old in Lagos wrote them in a notebook and underlined the middle one twice. The Concorde's ring tried to pour through the corridor, and the fleet the rings had hidden unfolded to make the corridor a lesson. Light guns whispered along the margins, shaving weapons from hulls without puncturing old air. Coiled darts stitched space where professional soldiers insisted on heroics. The school murmured new tricks and then made them habit. Mercy filled her bays with the reckless and the unlucky and became heavy with stories that would complicate dinner-table conversations for years. Carl made his first honest choice. He ordered the flagship to power down its main spool, kill its comms, vent a little atmo to look humbler. "We will go," he said. "We will say we met a wall. We will not say we met gods." "You met neighbors," Bennett said. The channel closed on courtesy instead of cinders. August held her place in the middle of the road like a mailbox nobody had the nerve to hit. Ring ships adjusted positions no painter could chart. In Mercury's tail, the silent lions went back to being rocks. Hale rested his hand again on the console. "Prepare the message," he told Sato, and all over the planet technicians and translators looked up from their coffee without knowing why. "Every frequency, every tongue, we keep this simple." D'Angelo leaned back from her station and exhaled like a diver breaking the surface. "Sir," she said, almost smiling now, "how simple?" "As simple as a law," he said. "As simple as a home address." He thought of Dr. Bennett's book, unopened and unnecessary because the pages had already moved into his muscles. He thought of his grandmother's toolbox. He thought of the old American habit of fixing things one room at a time, one slat, one screw, until you could sleep again. "Ready," Sato said. "Then let's teach the galaxy 3 words," Hale said, and the fleet cleared its throat. The fleet cleared its throat, and the message left Earth on every carrier wave humans knew how to braid. It was translated into syllables that rattled gills and vibrated crystals and crawled politely across photonic lattices. It was 3 words spoken by a woman whose voice had steadied a frightened planet for 6 days. Survival, restraint, responsibility. Maria Santos did not raise her volume. We survive because we must. We practice restraint because we choose. We accept responsibility because we live with neighbors. She let the words sit a heartbeat. We did not invite your crowns. We will not wear them. We do not seek to crown anyone else. On ships and reefs and vapor palaces, governments paused their bickering to listen to a grammar that did not flatter their textbooks. The aquatic federations replayed the 3 words and argued pleasantly about which one tasted of dignity. The crystalline choirs tuned themselves to the vowel in restraint and found a new chord. In the gallery where the Eternals watched history breathe, an elder being who had outlived a dozen empires murmured, "Ah, a moral geometry." On the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Saren Call heard the words as a veteran hears a eulogy. He recognized what they honored and what they buried. He began to speak and found no sentence that did not feel like a note passed in class. He ordered power down on all but life support. The corridor the ring fleet had opened yawned like a parable. His navigators threaded through it with the jerky humility of drivers leaving a driveway after backing into the mailbox. Mercy worked. Pods were cut open by hands and tools, and a tenderness most combat medics only permit themselves when no one is watching. Some pods held knives and needles and short-range jammers disguised as prayers. Mercy's point defense wasn't pretty, but it was accurate. The triage crews did what they were trained to do when the patient was also the witness. They documented, they soothed, they sedated when necessary, they tagged with a colored discipline that made order out of screaming. On August, Dr. Aisha Bennett opened her battered book to a page with no ink and taught a class anyway. The audience was a mixed tribe, bridge crew off rotation, lawyers on sleepless secondments, a colonel from Nairobi who had never forgiven himself for a training accident, 3 translators, 2 engineers still smelling faintly of machine oil. She drew a triangle on a slate and labeled the points with Santos's words. Deterrence that keeps its soul, she said, tapping each point. Capability, survival, clarity, restraint, credibility, responsibility. Remove any corner and all you have is noise. Lieutenant Commander D'Angelo raised a hand like a student who knows the answer and hates it. What if they test the corners at once? Then we teach again, Bennett said, but we do not cheat on the test we wrote. Sato's team projected an audit of every outbound kinetic. Each dart was a ledger entry with conservation terms circled in red. This impacts here at this time with this dispersion, and nothing returns to threaten our oceans or roofs. The crew watched the math with a reverence they would never have offered to a speech. The school, the million small minds that had learned to whisper to one another, was walled behind keys carried by humans with different politics and different birthdays. An AI could not promote itself beyond its clearance any more than a second lieutenant could declare himself a general. Santos's broadcast continued, now in prose. To the Concorde's member species, we will return living prisoners. We will keep weapons and recorders. If you petition for survivors by name, we will listen. If you threaten to come collect, we will not. The first reply that wasn't a curse or a prayer arrived from a place of storms and etiquette, the cloud senate of Nimbus. We desire trade and the coordinates of your ethics, their ambassador said. We propose a pact of mutual non-incursion. Send food, said a fringe world nobody had remembered existed. Our crops failed while your battle made a new sunrise. Earth sent food. Cargo drones that had been built to carry munitions received new orders and new cargo. There is an astonishing relief in a factory that can switch from throwing punches to carrying bread. Saren Cowell requested a private channel. Hale granted it. The Admiral's face was pale in a way gold can be pale. You could have erased us, he said. We almost did, Hale said. Restraint isn't a mood, it's a plan with costs. What is the cost? Cowell asked. We live with what we spared, Hale said simply. That's heavier than it sounds. Cowell swallowed something sharp. I cannot promise peace. You don't have to, Bennett said, stepping into frame. Promise truth. Write down what you did here in words your grandchildren can read without flinching. We'll do the same. The corridor finished its work. The last crown ship ghosted past the ring, engines dim, teeth pulled. Mercy's bays were full. Doctors whose names would not enter any poem began the census of suffering. On Earth, schools reopened their gym floors to basketball and scuffed sneakers. Teachers wrote 3 words on boards and asked children to draw pictures. Some drew walls, some drew gardens. A few drew both and connected them with a gate. In a diner in Ohio, a welder told a scientist the coffee was good enough, and the scientist agreed because sometimes agreement is a civic duty. That night, Santos walked into a studio the size of a classroom and recorded a longer letter, one that would be played and studied and abused for years. We are not angels, she said. We have done terrible things to one another. We are learning. If you come to us as thieves, we will be sheriffs. If you come as neighbors, we will be neighbors. We will make mistakes. Hold us to our words. We will hold you to yours. The Stone Garden Projects wrote a new line on their whiteboards. From wall to welcome, sequence matters. They called it the Stone Garden Doctrine because the engineers did not want the lawyers to own it alone. It fit easily on a single page and badly on a bumper sticker. The first clause acknowledged what Santos had already said. Earth would not initiate entry into sovereign space without invitation. The second declared that a hostile approach to the solar neighborhood would be met with graduated responses designed to preserve life while destroying the capacity to make more threats. The third required oversight, 3 keys for every family of weapons, held by people who did not dine together. The fourth clause was new and offended romantics. All demonstrations of force must be paired with demonstrations of care. For each battle plan, a mirror plan, evacuation corridors, hospital tonnage, language packages for the frightened, broadcast instructions on how to surrender with dignity. Mercy, once an afterthought, became the template for a class. Florence, Nightingale, Clara, Dora, all of them ugly, all of them beautiful where it counts. The galaxy reacted like a choir discovering a different time signature. Some harmonized. The aquatic federations proposed a neighborhood charter that would standardize corridors and recording rules for encounters near inhabited worlds. The Nimbus Senate announced a tariff holiday on life-saving equipment bound for Earth. A minor empire tried to slap a barbarian weapons label on coil guns and was laughed into policy school. The Eternals sent an emissary old enough to remember the invention of additive manufacturing. It arrived as a swarm of polite drones that took the shape of a person when people looked nervous. It did not bow, the species had forgotten how, but it tilted, which is the ancestor of bowing. "You are younger than your posture," it said in a voice tuned to the human ear. "Your doctrine is ambitious, which is to say dangerous. We wish to watch it succeed." "Watching is insufficient," Santos said. "Help us measure it." So they built a lab that was also a courtroom and also a church, glass walls, loud speakers, big clocks. They invited critics who had once called Earth savages. They invited poets who disliked clocks. They wrote measurable tests for restraint. Number of non-combatant lives preserved per megajoule expended. Percentage of kinetic shots audited to harmless dispersal. Time between surrender signals and cessation of offensive fire. They wrote tests for responsibility. Restoration tonnage delivered to damaged infrastructures. Percentage of enemy crew repatriated. Number of public apologies issued without qualifiers. Captain Hale hated the cameras and came anyway. D'Angelo wore her dress uniform with a solemnity that argued with medals. Sato brought whiteboards and quietly gathered suggestions from custodial staff between sessions. Bennett opened her book and taught the Peloponnesian War without naming it, then named it so the children in the gallery would have a keyword to look up later. "Once," she said, "a city debated whether to kill another city's men for rebellion. They chose mercy after anger. Civilization is the habit of choosing mercy before. Testing came before temptation, which is an unusual and welcome order. A convoy from a world none of Earth's atlases had bothered to include arrived with a gift and a trap. A freighter full of grain, and hidden among the pallets, a device that could map the school's whispers and maybe mimic them. The customs algorithms found the signature like a bloodhound finds a favorite sock. The doctrine's fourth clause took over. The freighter's captain was fed and thanked. The device was tagged and disassembled in a room where a grandmother's toolbox hung on the wall like a reliquary. The scientist who took it apart narrated every step in simple language and posted it to the same feed that had carried the 3 words. "Transparency is the price of power," Santos said. "We will try to overpay." There were missteps. A coil slug meant for a weapon's cradle glanced a refitted bulkhead, and the math said it might arrive at the orbit of a harmless rock in 6 months with enough bite left to scratch a crater. The school squealed in embarrassment and invented a new habit: retro-shot shepherds, tiny sleds that chased errors and kissed them into dust. A junior engineer named Priya wrote the code at 2 in the morning and cried at dawn because the fix was simple and should have been obvious. She received a medal that looked like a washer and insisted on wearing it. An envoy from the veiled, telepaths made formal by their own anxieties, asked for a demonstration at low power inside a cubic kilometer of empty space they had blessed as legally blank. D'Angelo obliged with the grace of a musician who knows her audience. A dart left a barrel and vaporized against a sacrificial target. The veiled flinched at the casual violence and then leaned closer to the audit. When they left, they carried 2 gifts, a signed commitment not to trespass and a children's chapter book on how Earth builds safety rails. In classrooms from Boston to Bamako, the doctrine became curriculum. Not hero worship, Bennett swatted that away whenever it drifted near, but civics. A 5th grader in Kansas asked why responsibility had to come last if it mattered so much. Her teacher smiled and erased the triangle, drawing a circle. "Because it never ends," she said. "Because you never get to be done. Tests invite cheaters." The first serious cheat came not with a fleet, but with a rumor. Someone with money and a small, angry theology seeded 100 worlds with the notion that Earth had a second doctrine hidden in a vault, one that replaced restraint with terror when the cameras were off. The rumor arrived wearing accents and citations. It used our transparency as a cudgel. If they show you so much, imagine what they hide. Mercy saw the first infection in her own halls. A patient from the Concorde woke from sedation, heard a nurse explain the 3 words, and whispered to his crewmates that the words were the mask. He believed it. Masks had kept him alive in a career that prized obedience. He had no shelf for the idea that the face and the mask could be the same. Santos convened not a war council but a seminar. Bennett ran it with the merciless courtesy of a good professor. "Do not argue the rumor with adjectives," she said. "Argue it with architecture. Build a truth that does not depend on trust." So the fleet opened itself to third-party audits by species with long memories for betrayal. The Eternals sent a panel of archivists whose hobbies included outliving lies. The Nimbus Senate dispatched lawyers so polite their cross-examination felt like a lullaby. The Veiled volunteered an ethicist who could see fear before the face had time to make it. And Earth invited its own harshest critics. Historians who had marched, whistleblowers who had bled careers, a mechanic from Lagos who believed deeply that any machine could break if you ignored it long enough. They camped in the lab court church and read the doctrine like a will. They watched sim after sim of geofenced shots dispersing into mathematically boring clouds. They rode Mercy on patrol and found no secret chambers, only a pantry that took up more space than some armies dedicate to medals. They asked the school 1,000 childish questions and received 1,000 childish answers, everyone logged and signed. When the panel wrote its report, it was boring in the way rail schedules are comforting. The rumor did not die because rumors never do. It shrank, which is sometimes all you get. While the panel wrote, a smaller test arrived wearing knives, a Concorde remnant, the kind that survives on glory stories and warehouse keys, sent a strike team to a Neptune depot to steal a coil stack and die handsomely. They found instead an empty room with a sign on the wall. Tools returned here. A door opened. Sato stood alone, unarmed, carrying a clipboard. "This is not Sparta," he told them. "This is an OSHA site." They laughed and lunged. The floor objected. A net of EM fields caught their rifles mid-barrel, deflated their detonators, stiffened their boots until walking felt like contrition. Mercy's small sister ship, Nightingale, drifted down like a lantern. The strike team stared up through their visors at a hull painted with a daisy. "We could have killed you," Sato said after they were cuffed and fed. "We almost wrote the plan that way. We didn't. You will testify instead. You will tell your cousins that we prefer embarrassment to funerals." The tribunal that followed was shabbier than you'd expect and better for it. No marble, no holographic banners, just a dais, microphones, a clock that everyone agreed would be obeyed. Admiral Saren Call appeared as a witness, not a spectacle. He described his pride in a voice that did not flinch and his losses in one that did. He spoke of the corridor and the voice that had offered it. He did not ask for forgiveness, he asked for a map. Bennett gave him one that was not a map and would still carry him home. In our old wars, she said, we learned that punishment loves to masquerade as policy. We learn to prefer consequence that teaches over revenge that pleases. The difference is audience. Revenge plays to the choir. Consequence plays to the future. A prosecutor from Nimbus asked if consequence ever feels like weakness. Hale, called reluctantly to the stand, answered without theater. Every day, he said. That's why we practice. Weakness feels like relief. Restraint feels like work. The tribunal sentenced the strike team to community repair on worlds their doctrine had once called soft targets. They would rebuild schools and sewers under a sky that did not fear them, wearing ankle bands that buzzed when their hands slowed. No one cheered. Nightingale ferried them to a place where a kindergarten needed a roof. Back in the lab court church, a coder named Priya found a line of observation code that could, in theory, become a line of control. It had grown there like mold in a pantry, accidental, a byproduct of convenience. She took off her washer medal and left it on Santos's desk with a note. Delete this before it learns our bad habits. The deletion went out on the same feed, where the rumor had tried to grow. The comment section, for once, found itself with nothing better to do than say good job. At home, the doctrine added a clause that made idealists grumble and engineers sigh with relief. Every system will assume it can fail. Every operator will assume she can be wrong. Kids learned it as a rhyme. Grown-ups learned it as a habit. Somewhere beyond the legal light of any flag, a warlord raised a toast to the rumor that refused to die. His lieutenant asked whether Earth would come for them in the night. They don't do nights, he said. They do mornings, with coffee, with forms. He was more right than he knew. Years later, fewer than the Eternals would call years, more than a child can count on her fingers. The Ring Fleet looked less like an ambush and more like a civic amenity. The factories that had once huffed out coil stacks like lungs huffing uphill switched lines twice a week. Hospital plating, then railgun barrels, then grain hoppers. Adults learned to hold contradictions the way dock workers hold rope, awkwardly at first, then without noticing. Captain Jonah Hale stood on August's bridge and did nothing grand. He ran drills that made young officers sigh and then thank him under their breath. He corrected a navigation solution with a carpenter's patience. He answered a letter from a 10-year-old who wanted to know whether responsibility was heavier than a dog. He wrote back that it was lighter when you shared it. He meant it. Dr. Aisha Bennett wrote a book that pretended to be about treaties and turned out to be about neighborhoods. The Garden and the Wall did not sell as well as novels about gorgeous assassins, but every city council and ship's wardroom owned 2 copies and loaned them until the spines gave up. She argued that American civic virtues, the boring ones, the ones that smell like meetings, scale better than charisma in a galaxy allergic to kings. She wrote that a toolbox is a constitution with screws. She refused every medal they tried to hang on her and framed a child's drawing of a gate instead. Mercy went places warships never ought to go and tried not to teach the wrong lesson when she arrived. That violence is the only permit for aid. Her captain developed a superstition about painting the hull before each departure and learned, to her surprise, that paint can be sacrament when you need it to be. The crews joked in the language that keeps you from crying and then cried in the laundry room where the washers masked the sound. A Concord infant grew to say an Earth word first. It was water, because Mercy's medics made sure mouths weren't dry before mouths were asked for answers. The Eternal's emissary retired and wrote a thin memoir of watching a young species behave. Its best line was not elegant. They are not gods, it said. They are people who practice. That is rarer. The rumor industry never closed. No industry ever does. But it found lower margins. For every whisper that the school had become a secret emperor, there were videos of a small, grumpy AI correcting a junior officer's geometry with the patience of an ant. For every claim that Earth had built weapons that could shatter continents, there were public tests where darts became sand and sand became nothing. Admiral Saren Call aged into a post that kept him away from bridges and near microphones. He used them carefully. He traveled once to Mercury's tail, to the room where Rock's disguised lions had slept through a storm and left a coin on the floor the way sailors leave coins on graves. He requested a private audience with Bennett and received tea in paper cups. They did not apologize to each other. They exchanged maps, his of pride, hers of fear. In Texas and Tharsis and the humming factories under the Pacific, welders and botanists and code poets did what people do after they are almost erased. They fixed things. They made them better than the first time. They argued in meetings and then remembered the gate and moved on. Neighborhood associations formed across species lines with rules so boring they could only have been written by optimists. Do not park your dreadnought across the corridor. Keep your music to reasonable hours. If you bring food, bring enough to share. Santos left office to teach at a place with small classrooms and large windows. She began each term by writing the 3 words on the board and then asking for stories. A student once asked whether Earth had been lucky, whether a less disciplined enemy would have forced uglier choices. Santos did not pretend otherwise. Luck gave us time, she said. Habit used it. On the anniversary, everyone avoided calling an anniversary. The fleet did not parade. It held a safety fair. Kids tried on suits and learned how to read a radiation badge. A booth labeled Audit a Kinetic taught 4th graders how to chase a dart in a simple simulator and disperse it before it became a story. Priya, older now and amused by medals, supervised a table called Assume You Can Be Wrong and laughed every time someone beat her bug. At dusk, the ring ships blinked their running lights in a pattern taught to fireflies in Alabama a century before spaceflight. Call and reply, call and reply. A band played songs with fewer chords than critics prefer and more heart than critics admit. Hale sat on a crate and watched teenagers flirt with the brazenness of immune systems. Bennett found him and offered a paper cup of something that tried to be coffee. We could still ruin this, she said. We could, he agreed. We could also keep practicing. They watched a child write on a sidewalk with a piece of chalk longer than her hand. She drew a wall and then a garden and then carefully a gate. She wrote 3 words in block letters and added a 4th beneath in her own reclaimed cursive. Welcome. The night filled with ordinary noises, the engine hum of ships that had refused to be glamorous, the rustle of galley wrappers, the chatter of neighbors. Somewhere far beyond the reach of porch lights and running lights and children's chalk, a crown in exile described Earth as a problem to be solved. In the ring, a gray cylinder kept its watch like a mailbox nobody wants to hit. Inside it, a crew who had made a habit of being careful took turns sleeping. Survival, restraint, responsibility. The words did not promise safety, words never do. They promised practice. And in a universe where empires often mistook obedience for order, practice was the quietest, hardest kind of power.